Hello plant lovers, Matthew in Melbourne, welcoming you back to my channel, Hello Plant Lovers, and today it's a bit of a Dendrobium special. I do post every week, so hit subscribe if my journey through cold, cool, intermediate growing orchids here in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is of any interest. But okay, let's talk dendrobiums, and let's talk specifically hard cane dendrobiums and soft cane dendrobiums and the difference therein. Because I am a rank amateur, I never really did get to understand quite what the difference was, so I'm going to distill this down to a very simple principle, which might have no horticultural truth, but it is kind of my truth, it's my personal truth, and maybe it will work for you. So essentially, as you can see here, this dendrobium is a hard cane dendrobium, and I don't know if it really is that obvious from the canes themselves, but the major difference for me is the flowers. So a hard cane dendrobium always flowers from the top of the cane like this, and it often is a branching inflorescence which will have many different flowers on it. So for example, the Australian Dendrobium kingianum and speciosum, which I made videos about, which I will link up here, are hard cane dendrobiums. Tend not to be deciduous, but of course sometimes they can drop a leaf, whereas their soft cane relatives, depending on the type, can often be semi-deciduous or completely deciduous. And then the flowers on a soft cane dendrobium, which I will come in and show you because this one happens to be in bud right now, so it's a great chance to see. They appear on the stem of the cane on the opposite side to a leaf. So you'll see the little junction where the leaf is attached. On the opposite side to that is where the flower bud appears. And with soft cane dendrobiums, you can still get like a little mini branch. There might be 2 or 3 or 4 sometimes flowers from each of these points, but they flower from a different point to the hard cane dendrobiums. And knowing the difference actually is quite important because although it's impossible to generalize, they do have slight variations in the types of conditions they want, so it is important to know. Okay, so let's get to basics with this one and this one with the names. Firstly, this little baby here is called Dendrobium Red Ballerina Macquarie. Macquarie was a famous colonial identity in New South Wales in Australia, if you're not from this part of the world. And this one is a hybrid between 2 different types of dendrobium. So its parents are a native to Queensland and also actually parts of Papua New Guinea called Dendrobium bigibum. Let's not make any prurient jokes about its name. It's also commonly known as the Cooktown orchid. Cooktown is a town in Australia, in Queensland, and it has quite large, very purple, magenta purple flowers. So this one bears some of the colour characteristics, but really more of the form of its other parent, which is Dendrobium agrostophyllum. And agrostophyllum is an Australian orchid again, but it comes from relatively high altitudes for Australia, but it nonetheless does come from a tropical region, but is described as cool to warm growing. Now the other parent, the bigibum, or the Cooktown orchid as we might call it, is definitely a warm growing. It's a tropical climate orchid. So you've got that mixed parentage, and I think this is important in understanding perhaps what the particular care of your dendrobiums might be, is to find out what the ancestry is and where the 2 major parents came from. Then you can figure out quite what the orchid needs. So this one has a warm to hot and a cool to warm parentage. So, you know, it can kind of go either way in terms of its temperature requirements. I tend to find though that these type of hard cane dendrobiums are generally happier in a warmer climate. Now, the other Australian ones, the Dendrobium kingianum and speciosum, can take much cooler temperatures and they're kind of easier for me to grow in Melbourne. So I'm kind of thrilled that this one just burst into bloom for me, and I'm confident that I can make this one happy, but it's probably not going to thrive outdoors even under cover. It's probably going to be happier indoors where the ambient minimum temperature is always a little bit higher. Now the agrostophyllum dendrobium parent has flowers that look very much like this, so they don't open completely, but they're very yellow. So what this orchid has inherited is the form of the flower with the color accents of bigibum, the Cooktown orchid. And you know what, plant lovers, I'm about to say something really scandalous. I'm not sure if I love the form of this flower not opening fully. I think the Cooktown orchid opens brilliantly, and it's a huge and beautifully showy flower. So I've noticed that there is a small variety of that called compactum, strangely enough, and it is billed as being a bit more cool tolerant. So maybe I have to give that one a go to get the full beauty of the flowers. But nonetheless, I'm very happy with you. I'm not sure though that this might be staying in my collection. But what I will do is grow it up and get lots of flowering heads, and maybe I'll give it to someone else. One of the things I have learned is that one must be ruthless. If things don't work or they're kind of not what you want, and space is always a premium, move it on, baby. Researching the parentage and the origins of your dendrobiums, and lots of them are hybrids. Some are species that are quite easy to find, but a lot are hybrids. I went to a site which I will link below, which is called Australian Registered Hybrid List, and I'll put the link below. Now it's an enormous list of Australian orchids that have been hybridized, and what it does is gives you the parentage, and what you can then do is research the parents that are species. You can go to orchidspecies.com and find out where the parents come from and what the ideal growing conditions for that is, and then you can hazard a bit of a guess in terms of what yours is going to like. So both parents of this come from northeast of Australia and Papua New Guinea, so it's a tropical orchid that likes warmer temperatures. So yeah, I don't think it's going to love being outdoors, even undercover in Melbourne. Now, as with many dendrobiums, this one does like a drier rest over winter, but not completely dry. So my strategy with that is to let the medium dry out, leave it dry for a couple of days, maybe a bit longer than you would with another type of orchid, and then give it not a huge watering, but a gentle watering. That's during winter. Obviously during its growing season in spring and summer, and to some degree also when it's warmer, you'll need to water it more. These buds appeared very much in autumn. I was a bit surprised by that, but then researching the ancestry, I realized, the orchid's parents tend to bloom in winter, so there you go. And where they both come from, it is very definitely a monsoonal, dry, wet seasonality in terms of the climate. So it is used to a drier period, but with a bit more humidity. So perhaps in winter I will miss this rather than watering it heavily. So that's the history and the genealogy. This is like Who Do You Think You Are? Of Dendrobium Red Ballerina Macquarie. The other thing to remember about hard cane dendrobiums is that this cane is new. As you can see, it's very juicy and fabulous and large. Generally, they take a year to mature and then they can bloom. But most hard cane dendrobiums will then continue to flower from those canes until the cane dies. You know, with a lot of orchids, you get a new growth, it flowers, and then you have a new growth which flowers, and then the previous one is incapable of flowering again. Not so with these. So you'll get flowers every season from that same growth. So even if it should drop its leaves, don't cut them off unless you can see that it very much has died. Okay, so there is our hard cane dendrobium, and there is our beautiful flower, which perhaps isn't that beautiful. Let's move on to its cousin. Okay, now this is a fabulous soft cane dendrobium, which is called Euryalus, Dendrobium Euryalus. And I actually made a video about this one, which I will link above. Now, it has the most sensational flowers. And again, by searching through its ancestry, I was able to discover the two key parents, which are Dendrobium nobile, which is the mother of all, well, the mother of a lot of hybridized dendrobiums, and Dendrobium heterocarpum. Now, both of those are Asiatic dendrobiums. The nobile orchid is very much sort of a Himalayan orchid, so it's higher altitudes and can take cooler temperatures, while heterocarpum is spread all the way through Southeast Asia, coming down to the Philippines, etc. So that can take warmer temperatures. So both of them would basically be described as cool to warm, whereas heterocarpum is probably a little bit more on the spectrum towards warm. Anyway, so again, it's interesting to find out the parentage of your hybrids so you can kind of figure out, is my climate going to work? Now this one I grow here in Melbourne, and I grow it outdoors, undercover, all year, so it deals with the winter. And the thing is with soft cane dendrobiums is that a lot of them come from that Himalayan area of Asia and then coming down into Southeast Asia, but a lot of those northern Asian ones are quite cool, sometimes cold tolerant. So there's a lot of opportunity there if you're growing in a climate like mine, where you don't want to put them indoors or in greenhouses or whatever. As long as they're covered over and protected from the elements, they'll do really well with quite low temperatures. So just have a check on the parentage of your orchid and get a sense of where it comes from as to how cool it can go. The flowers on mine are amazing. And so here's another curious thing, which I only just discovered by researching the ancestry of this one, is that I had just assumed that my nobile type dendrobiums are only going to flower once a year, and that tends to be in very early spring. So what these orchids all tend to need is a dry rest in winter, dry and cool. So the coolness and the dryness stimulate the flowers, as does the lower sun. So a bit more light penetration in autumn and winter for this type of orchid. Still protected during the day though, so that the leaves don't burn, so dappled light. But strong morning sunlight is not a bad idea for this type of dendrobium. But I went through the care instructions for this in the other video. But the thing is, I noticed about a month ago, flower buds starting to form, and I'll come in and show you on this. And I was a bit confused because I'd always assumed this flowered once a year in early spring. Well, no, plant lovers. I have discovered that its two parents have multiple flowering seasons. The nobile parents flowers mostly in winter and spring, whereas the heterocarpum parent can flower in winter, spring, and summer. So there you go. Essentially, it means that they could flower at multiple times in the year. Perhaps because we had quite a cool summer here in Melbourne this year, perhaps that change in temperature has triggered these flowers, so not sure. I'm also curious to see if it might have another flush of flowering later in the season in spring, moving into early summer. So let's watch this space. So I'm really fascinated by it. But as I said in the other video about this, the flowers tend to appear on the older canes that have started to lose their leaves. Now this one is semi-deciduous, so it doesn't lose all of its leaves at once. And can you see here, we have a leaf that's kind of turning a bit yellowy, limey. So that is what happens with each leaf. They go very yellow and then drop off quite naturally. And you can see on this cane here that there is only, I think, one leaf left. We've got lots of flower buds. So again, with nobile type orchids, don't be tempted to cut off the canes because they are nude. You never know if it might flower again. You'll know when the canes have died because they become really dry, really shriveled and very beige and they look dead. Whereas some of these nude ones, these older canes here, you can still see are quite green. So I wouldn't be trimming that at all. Spring is when this orchid puts on its new growth, and there actually, I can just see some shoots starting to appear here. So this one, again, likes a dry winter, and I keep this a bit drier than the other hard cane dendrobium. But again, I don't not water it at all during winter. I let it dry out a lot, and then when I do water it, it's not a huge amount. It's more of a dampening of the surface, just because I can't be that tough love kind of parent, but it seems to thrive. But you know, they can take no water, but you'll see that the canes start to get really shriveled and desiccated if it needs a drink. I guess the thing is though, not to water it on a very cold and overcast morning, but if you've got kind of a sunny, bright day in your winter, then just moisten the surface a little bit without drenching it, just to give it a little bit of a lift. So there we go. The essential difference between hard cane and soft cane dendrobiums is really where the flower comes from. And again, with soft cane dendrobiums, it's pretty similar to this in that the cane can offer you flowers continually, so don't cut them off. And this one is also a very vigorous grower. So this plant has kind of quadrupled in size very quickly. So the nobile types, I think, are a great one to grow because you get a specimen really quickly, which means whenever it does flower, and not all the canes will flower at once because the canes need to mature and then start to drop a few leaves, become a little bit deciduous before they will bear flower buds. So you won't get all of the canes blooming at once because these new ones from last year will need another year to mature. So you get the flowers on the older canes, but the bigger your specimen, obviously, the more opportunity you're going to get for flowers. Light conditions for hard cane dendrobiums, not dissimilar to this one really, but I do feel they can take a little bit more sun, so a little bit more direct sun, but not all day and certainly not midday at the hottest part of the day because the leaves will burn. But my feeling with the ones that I grow is that they can take a bit more sun. The Dendrobium kingianums and the speciosums, the Australian ones, can certainly take a bit more sun, but again, they do need protecting from the harsh afternoon sun. So in the afternoon, dappled light is a really good idea, but they can take a bit more morning light. There we are, plant lovers, Dendrobium kind of 101. This has been my learning curve of figuring out what's going to work for me and what the difference is. And it is quite hard to get a sense of it really, but ultimately it is about where the flowers come from for me. And I think hard canes tend to have longer, strappier, really tough leaves, whereas soft cane dendrobiums tend to be a little rounder and a little softer. Feel free to ask a question. I'm an amateur, so I might not be able to answer. And I'll keep you up to date with this one and see if we do get a second flowering season, because I'm kind of intrigued by this. It's never done it before. It's never flowered this early for me before either, so there you go. I look forward to seeing you next week, and I hope whatever you're growing is thriving. Do hit subscribe if you want, and I will see you next week.